When a lot of modern chemicals were developed, it was the Victorian period of time. And one of the things that the Victorians had a lot of was coal tar. And they had a lot of coal tar because streetlights were lit with gas, and that was extracted from the coal, and therefore they had a lot of coal tar as a byproduct, and it was free. So if you were a research chemist, you could get a lot of that. What happened then was that people developed all sorts of chemicals. So some, for example, modern fragrance materials like coumarin were developed from coal tar. But more interestingly for everyone, modern dye stuffs, azo dyes and other dyes were developed from coal tar. So when you look at Queen Victoria sitting there in purple, that was one of the first ever new dye stuffs, and it was incredibly expensive, and that's why you know, as a queen, you wore it. And then they started to develop through the First World War other colours, so that you could dye curtains and carpets and bedding and clothes. And it wasn't very long before some bright spark took carpet dyes and started to dye people's hair with it. And the problem with that was that it was very, very allergic. People had dreadful reactions to it. Their tongues would swell, they would asphyxiate and die, which was not good, or they would just get dreadful allergic reactions and itch and, and be in a bad state for several days. But that didn't stop people doing it because they did like to have their hair coloured. Now the problem with these dyes as well is that they because they were very tiny molecules, they could pass through the skin and into the bloodstream. So basically, when they checked people who had had their hair dyed recently, they could find traces of the dye in their urine. So when they had a wee, they could find the dye stuff for up to 24 hours after having their hair dyed. Now they're tests on people. When they started to test it on animals, they really couldn't agree whether it had any negative effect at all. So there were lots of, and have still been, lots and lots of tests on animals over the years, and still this material is used. So here we've got a series of tests then that aren't quite up to the job. And it's not surprising really, because you wouldn't expect rubbing a bit of dye stuff on a hamster or a guinea pig and then seeing what happens to them to be a very good model for a human being. In the modern world, well, when I first started my career, at that time, finished cosmetics were tested on animals. So an eyeshadow, a lipstick, a shampoo, they would go through a series of routine tests on animals. That wasn't really very nice, and quite often very cruel. So we started to come up with a standard that all cosmetic companies could join to stop the testing of finished products on animals. And it became a huge issue, and many, many people wrote to cosmetic companies, and basically testing of cosmetics on animals, finished cosmetics on animals, in a cruel way or a kind way, stopped. So that was a great success.
Great success.
Still, when I had to look at it and think, well, we may not be testing the finished goods, but we are still testing the raw materials. So they were still taking the raw materials and they were having a look at them on animals. So we came up with this new rule, if you like, which said, if you're testing on animals, we won't buy from you. One of the most exciting things during the last government was that they banned testing on animals for cosmetic purposes. That included raw materials. And we had just thought we had won that, so it was all over. Everything would be cruelty-free. You'd never have to ask again or look again to see if something was cruelty-free. Sadly, a new set of legislation came in from Europe on the registration, evaluation and authorisation of chemicals. And this legislation meant that they would be screening all materials for their safety, and many of those tests would be on animals. Now our attitude here is that the best way of seeing if something's safe or not is for it to have had a long history of safe use. So if you take rosemary, people have been picking rosemary and popping it in their food or making teas out of it or washing their faces with it for at least 500 years. If you take henna, henna's been used for 2,000 years at least. People have rolled their babies in it, they've eaten it in Morocco. It has an extremely long history of safe use. So having something with a very safe, long history of use is the way we tend to work. So the situation we have now with cosmetics is that the raw materials where you could guarantee that they weren't going to be tested on animals, now even well-established things could be tested on animals. So REACH has started. REACH is a 3-year program and it has started. And when it became legislation, we took a big lorry load of horse dung and we put it outside the European Parliament, which made us feel slightly better but didn't save any animals' lives.
So this means that there are going to be more and more ingredients being tested where we can't find a supplier that hasn't been involved with animal testing. So where do we go now on cruelty-free? Well, we know we're not going to have finished products tested on animals, and we would like to create a new criteria against animal testing that includes the funding of alternatives to animal experiments. Hopefully we can raise some money to get that to happen, or certainly influence authorities to make that happen.
Stop that.
Despite the massive obstacles to cruelty-free cosmetics that REACH has thrown up, we haven't given up. We're still working hard every day to do everything we can to fight against animal testing and to improve safety through alternative technology.